Her first week at the hospital felt longer than her entire 4 years of nursing school. She arrived every morning before sunrise, tied her hair back neatly, checking her notes one more time in the locker room. She wanted to prove she belonged there. The hospital was one of the busiest in the city. The hallways were always loud. Machines beeped constantly. Nurses moved quickly from room to room. Doctors rarely slowed down. She knew she was new. She knew she had a lot to learn. But she also knew she was not careless. Still, from the very first day, she could feel the way some people looked at her. Not unkind exactly, but doubtful, like they had already decided she would not last long. During her orientation, a senior nurse told her quietly, "This place can chew people up." It was not meant to scare her. It was meant to prepare her. She nodded and smiled. On her fourth shift, everything changed. The emergency department was already full before noon. A highway accident had sent in multiple patients. One needed surgery. Another had broken ribs. Families were crying in the waiting area. The air felt heavy and rushed at the same time. She was assigned to assist in Trauma Room 3. A middle-aged man had been brought in earlier that morning with chest pain. At first, his condition seemed stable. The monitors showed numbers that were not alarming. The senior doctor leading the case had years of experience and a reputation for being confident. She reviewed the patient's chart carefully. Something about it bothered her. It was not dramatic. It was subtle. A small change in blood pressure. A slight irregularity in breathing. The kind of detail that could easily be brushed aside in a busy shift. She stepped closer to the bed and spoke gently to the patient. His answers were short. He looked pale more than before. She checked his pulse again. It felt different from what the monitor suggested. Her training told her not to ignore that feeling. She walked over to the senior doctor and spoke respectfully. She kept her voice calm. "I think we should run another test," she said. "His symptoms are shifting." The doctor barely looked up. "We already ran the necessary scans," he replied. "He's stable." She hesitated for a second. The room was busy. Another nurse was adjusting medication. A technician was typing notes into a computer. "I understand," she said carefully, "but I'm noticing changes in his pulse and breathing pattern. It might be early, but I think we should double check." This time the doctor looked at her directly. "And how long have you been here?" he asked. "A week," she answered honestly. There was a short silence. Not loud, not dramatic, just heavy. "We will proceed with the current plan," he said firmly. "Please focus on your assigned tasks." She nodded and stepped back. Her cheeks felt warm, but she did not argue. She returned to the patient's side and continued monitoring him closely. 10 minutes later, the monitor alarm sounded. The patient's blood pressure dropped suddenly. His breathing became shallow. The room shifted from busy to urgent in seconds. The doctor began giving rapid instructions. Additional staff rushed in. She moved quickly, following orders, handing equipment, adjusting lines. But inside, her heart pounded for a different reason. The change she had feared was happening. The team worked fast. After several tense minutes, the patient stabilized again. The crisis passed, but the atmosphere in the room was no longer calm. The doctor gave short instructions and left to speak with the patient's family. She stayed behind, documenting everything carefully. Another nurse glanced at her and whispered, "Rough one." She gave a small nod. An hour later, she was called into the administrative office. She assumed it was about routine paperwork. It was not. The department supervisor sat behind a desk, hands folded. The senior doctor was also in the room. The supervisor began speaking in a measured tone. "There was concern raised about your conduct during the trauma case earlier." She blinked in confusion. "Concern?" "It was reported that you questioned the treatment plan in front of staff, creating distraction during a critical moment." Her mind replayed the scene. She had spoken quietly. She had not interrupted. She had only suggested another test. "I was trying to advocate for the patient," she said softly. "I noticed changes." The senior doctor leaned back in his chair. "Experience matters in emergency medicine," he said. "Confidence is important, but so is knowing your place on a team." The word stung more than she expected. "I wasn't trying to overstep," she replied. "I just thought—" The supervisor raised a hand gently, cutting her off. "This hospital relies on clear hierarchy during emergencies. We cannot have uncertainty in front of patients or staff. After reviewing the situation, we've decided it may not be the right fit at this time." For a moment, she did not fully understand. "Are you saying—" "Yes," the supervisor said quietly. "Today will be your last shift." The room felt smaller. She had imagined difficult days. She had prepared for long hours, tough feedback, even mistakes. But she had not prepared for this. "I understand," she said, though her voice felt far away. She signed the necessary papers. She handed over her badge. Back in the locker room, she packed her things slowly. A folded photo from nursing school. A small notebook filled with reminders and goals. She placed them carefully into a small cardboard box. No one made a scene. A few co-workers avoided eye contact. One nurse gave her a quiet, apologetic look, but said nothing. She changed out her uniform top, but kept the scrub pants on. She did not want to stay long enough to process it. When she stepped outside, the sky was gray. The parking lot felt different now. Just hours earlier, she had walked in with determination. Now she walked out unemployed. She did not call anyone. She began walking toward the bus stop at the end of the street. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the distant sound of traffic. Her mind replayed everything. Should she have stayed silent? Should she have ignored her instincts? Was she too confident? Or not confident enough? Deep down, she knew she had not acted out of ego. She had acted out of care. She remembered something one of her instructors once told her. If you see something, say something, even if your voice shakes. Her voice had not shaken, but it had not been heard either. Halfway down the road, light rain began to fall. Not heavy, just steady enough to blur the edges of city lights. She did not run for cover. People passed her with umbrellas. Cars drove by without noticing her at all. She tightened her grip on the box in her hands. Being fired was embarrassing. But what hurt more was the idea that speaking up for a patient could cost her career. She thought about the man in Trauma Room 3. She hoped he would recover fully. She hoped someone would continue watching his numbers closely. She had chosen nursing because she believed every detail mattered. Every small sign. Every quiet change. As she reached the corner near the bus stop, she paused under a flickering streetlight. The rain tapped softly against the cardboard box. For the first time that day, her eyes filled with tears. Not loud sobbing, just silent disappointment. She had worked too hard to end like this. But even in that moment, standing alone in the rain, one thing remained steady inside her. She did not regret speaking up. The rain continued as she walked, soaking her hair in scrubs. Each step felt heavier than the last, not just because of the wet clothes, but because of the weight of humiliation she carried. Her mind wandered back to everything that had happened at the hospital. She had been cautious, respectful, and careful. Yet in just one day, her career, or at least her first step into it, had crumbled. She kept her gaze on the wet pavement. Streetlights reflected like tiny mirrors in puddles. Occasionally, cars splashed water near her, forcing her to jump aside. She did not have a destination, just a long path home and a need to think. Her thoughts turned inward, wandering back to her past. Before she became a nurse in the city, before she even thought about working in hospitals, she had been part of something much different, something intense, demanding, and dangerous. She had joined the Navy straight out of high school, not for glory or recognition, but because she wanted to help people. In those years, she had worked in some of the most challenging situations. She had provided medical care in disaster zones, on remote ships, and sometimes right on battlefields. Her training was harsh, the hours long, and the stakes higher than she could have imagined at that age. She had learned to stay calm under pressure, to notice small changes in a patient's condition that others might miss, to make decisions when there was no second opinion, and no time to hesitate. But she had left the Navy quietly. There had been no dramatic goodbye, no ceremony. She wanted a normal life, one that was less stressful, less dangerous, and perhaps a little slower. She wanted to be a nurse in a hospital where the worst emergencies were usually accidents, not life-and-death situations in war zones. Now, Walking home in the rain, that part of her life seemed very far away, yet strangely close. The calm confidence she had learned during those years felt buried under the embarrassment of being fired. She walked through a quiet neighborhood. Houses passed by, each with warm lights glowing inside. Families were eating dinner. Couples were talking. Children were playing. She was not part of that world right now. She had no home to return to at that moment, except for her small apartment. And even that seemed a distant thought. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced at it and ignored the call. She did not want to speak to anyone yet. Not until she had processed everything herself. She had always handled emergencies with a clear mind. Now she needed that clarity for herself. Halfway through her walk, she passed a small park. The rain had soaked the grass. The benches were wet, and the playground was empty. She stopped for a moment, staring at the dark puddles that reflected the gray sky above. She remembered the young sailors she had trained in first aid, the patients she had stabilized in situations that most people would run from. She realized that in her past, people had depended on her life-saving decisions. And yet, today, her expertise had been ignored, dismissed, and punished. A feeling of bitterness tried to creep in, but she pushed it away. She knew she could not stay in that mindset. Bitterness did not solve anything, and it certainly would not help her get another job or protect patients in the future. She needed to focus, to understand what had happened, and to figure out her next steps. Suddenly, a memory from earlier that day cut through her thoughts. The patient she had tried to help, the man in the trauma room, was no ordinary patient. She had not known it at the time, but he was a Navy officer visiting the city on official business. His medical condition had been critical enough that someone had noticed her recommendations, even if the hospital had dismissed her. Somewhere, high above the city, someone was already aware of the mistake. They were reviewing reports, checking records, and noticing the small details. They were seeing what she had seen, the subtle signs that could have led to disaster, if not corrected. She did not know who they were, but she could feel a shift in the air, an invisible force moving that might reach her soon. She continued walking, lost in thought. Her mind began running through scenarios. What if she never worked in a hospital again? What if no one recognized her skills outside of her Navy years? Would her career be over before it truly began? A sudden sound startled her, a distant hum that grew louder. At first, she thought it was a truck, but it did not sound right. The hum became a steady roar, cutting through the quiet night. She looked up and saw lights in the sky, moving fast, getting closer. Helicopters. 2 of them. Her heart jumped. She stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, shielded her eyes from the sudden glare of the lights. The helicopters descended, lowering themselves into an open field not far from the street where she walked. People nearby began to gather, pointing and murmuring. She was confused, unsure what was happening. Military helicopters did not usually land in residential areas. Before she could move, the helicopters touched down fully, kicking up rain and wind. Doors opened, and uniformed Navy officers stepped out, moving with purpose. One officer held a folder and a photograph, scanning the area as if looking for someone. Her heart raced. Could they be looking for her? It seemed impossible. She had not contacted anyone in the Navy, had not given her location. And yet, the officers were scanning the street, their eyes sharp, searching. One officer began walking toward her, calling out gently, "Are you the nurse who was in trauma room 3 today?" She blinked, uncertain. Her voice caught in her throat. "Yes," she said softly. They nodded. "We need to speak with you immediately. You may have saved a life today." Her mind spun. Saved a life? She had only been trying to do her job. And yet, here they were, military personnel, treating her as someone important. The confusion, the fear, and the disbelief all collided inside her. She stepped closer, unsure what to do. Another officer approached, speaking to her quietly. "Your quick actions and recommendations were crucial. The patient is stable now. The Navy is requesting your immediate presence." She could barely form words. I was just trying to help." "Exactly," the officer replied. "And that is why we need you." The world seemed to shift around her. Moments ago, she was a fired nurse walking home in the rain, humiliated and defeated. Now, She was the focus of a military operation, recognized for the very skills the hospital had dismissed. Her emotions were a whirlwind, pride mixed with relief, shock mixed with disbelief, fear mixed with exhilaration. She glanced at the helicopters, at the uniformed personnel, at the growing crowd of neighbors staring in awe. The officers guided her toward one of the helicopters. The rain beat down, soaking her completely, but she barely noticed. Her mind was focused on the man she had tried to save, the patient whose life had depended on her instincts. She realized that the lessons she had learned in the Navy, the calm and decisive thinking, had never left her. They had been inside her all along, waiting for the moment to prove their worth. As she climbed the steps into the helicopter, she felt a strange sense of destiny. The rookie nurse who had been dismissed and humiliated was now the same person who the Navy recognized as capable of making life-saving decisions under pressure. Her past, her training, her instincts, everything had led to this moment. The doors of the helicopter closed behind her. The roar of the engines filled her ears. She looked out the window at the wet streets below, the streetlights flickering, the rain blurring the world into streaks of silver and gray. For the first time that night, she allowed herself a small, quiet smile. She had walked through humiliation, through disappointment, through self-doubt. But now, she was on her way to prove that her skills, her instincts, and her courage were real and needed. Somewhere in the city, the patient she had tried to help was stable. And she, the nurse no one had taken seriously, was on her way to meet the people who had understood her value all along. The wind from the helicopters was fierce. Rain splattered against her face and soaked her hair and clothes. The noise was deafening, but she barely noticed it. Her focus was on the Navy officers moving around the landing zone, their steps purposeful and precise. One of the officers approached her again, holding out a hand to guide her through the mud and puddles. She hesitated for a moment, unsure what to say, then let him lead her toward one of the helicopters. The crowd of bystanders had grown. People were staring from sidewalks and open windows, phones out to capture the unusual scene. Their whispers and murmurs surrounded her, but she kept her eyes forward. Nothing else mattered except the officers and the mission they had come for. As they neared the helicopter, she saw inside the open door stretcher with a patient being carefully monitored. She recognized the man instantly. The same patient from earlier that day, the one she had tried to help, was now stabilized and being transported with full medical care. Her heart raced. Relief and pride mixed with disbelief. The patient's life had been saved, partly because she had noticed the small but crucial changes in his condition. She had trusted her instincts, and now she could see the results. The officer spoke in a low, firm voice. "We are taking him to a secure facility where specialized care is available. You are requested to accompany us to assist with his monitoring and treatment." She nodded, barely able to find words. "Of course. I just want to make sure he's okay." "That is exactly why we called for you," the officer said. "Your expertise is needed." She stepped onto the helicopter carefully, feeling the tilt of the aircraft under her feet. The doors closed behind her, and the sound of the rotors filled every corner. The pilot's calm voice came over the intercom, giving them instructions and reassuring the patient. Inside, she saw the full scale of the operation. Several Navy medics worked with precision, adjusting monitors, checking vitals, and communicating with the command center. The patient's condition was stable now, but the staff treated every measurement as critical. Every detail mattered. She moved to the side of the stretcher, checking the patient's lines and monitors. Her training kicked in automatically. Hands steady, eyes sharp. She made adjustments and suggested slight changes to medication timing. The medics listened, following her guidance without hesitation. For a moment, she allowed herself to take it in. This was her world. High stakes, immediate consequences. People relying on her knowledge and instinct. She remembered the Navy training, the long nights in rough conditions, the pressure of life and death decisions. None of that had left her. It had been dormant, waiting for the moment to matter again. Outside, the city blurred under the rain and the speed of the helicopter. Buildings flashed by, lights flickering, traffic moving like tiny ants below. She did not notice it. Her entire focus was on the patient and the team around her. One of the senior officers came over and spoke quietly. "You did exactly the right thing earlier. Your actions today prevented a critical situation from worsening. The hospital may not understand, but we do. That is why we are here." She nodded, swallowing hard. Emotion that had been bottled up for hours, embarrassment, doubt, fear, now mixed with relief and pride. She had been ignored, dismissed, and humiliated just hours ago. Now, her instincts were recognized as not only valid but life-saving. The helicopter banked slightly as they approached the designated landing area. Security and medical personnel were already in position, ready to take over patient care. They would continue treatment, and she would remain on site to ensure smooth transition. She glanced at the patient. His eyes were closed, breathing steady. A small sense of peace washed over her. She had advocated for him when no one else would, and now she saw the outcome of her actions. It was proof that even one person's careful observation and willingness to speak up could make a difference. As they landed, the helicopter touched down smoothly. The doors opened, and a team of medics moved in immediately. They greeted her with professional courtesy, quickly taking over monitoring and care. She stepped back slightly, observing their methods and confirming that nothing would be missed. The senior officer turned to her. "We want you to come with us for debriefing and to ensure continuity of care. Your input is essential for the next phase of treatment." She nodded again. She had never imagined her day would end this way. From being fired and walking home in the rain to being asked to assist in a critical Navy medical operation, the contrast was staggering. As she followed the officers, she thought about the hospital staff who had doubted her, the doctors who dismissed her concerns, the administrators who called her actions inappropriate. She did not feel anger toward them now. She felt understanding. They had seen only the surface. They did not know the depth of her experience, the training she had endured, or the instincts she had developed over years of high-pressure medical work. In a way, it was a lesson for everyone. Competence is not always obvious. Experience is not always visible. Courage and careful observation can come from the quietest, least noticed person in the room. The rain had lessened slightly as they moved to a secure facility. Inside, the sterile lighting and quiet hum of machines replaced the chaos of the streets. The patient was transferred to a specialized medical bed with advanced monitoring equipment. She worked alongside the Navy medical team, providing updates and recommendations. One of the senior medics leaned toward her. "You kept your composure in the trauma room today. That is rare for someone so new to hospital medicine. You have skill beyond your apparent experience." She felt a small, proud smile form. "Thank you. I've had experience in field conditions before, but this was different. Hospitals are faster in some ways, but more constrained in others." They nodded. "Regardless, your actions today mattered." She looked at the patient again. His breathing was steady, his vitals normal. She checked the monitors one last time before stepping back, letting the team continue their work. For the first time that day, she felt a sense of peace. The officers approached her again, speaking quietly. "We will ensure your actions are recognized. You were correct to speak up. The patient's survival is proof." She nodded, swallowing hard. Words were unnecessary. The reality of the moment, the validation she had longed for, was enough. Outside the window, the rain had almost stopped. The city glowed under the evening lights. She realized that the world she had walked through earlier, the humiliation, the doubt, the loneliness, had not been the end. It had been a turning point. The helicopter that brought her here would return to pick her up if needed. For now, she remained in the secure facility, assisting with the transition and observing the specialized care being provided. She took a deep breath and reminded herself that this was just the beginning. Her actions had mattered today, but she still had a career ahead, still had the chance to prove herself in ways she had never imagined. The rookie nurse who had been fired hours ago was no longer just a newcomer lost in the chaos of the hospital. She was a skilled professional, recognized by those who understood the weight of every decision. She had walked through humiliation and emerged stronger, her instincts validated, her courage confirmed. And as she watched the patient stabilize, the medics working efficiently, and the officers coordinating seamlessly, she realized one important truth. Speaking up, trusting herself, and acting decisively, even when others doubted her, could change lives. In that moment, surrounded by the quiet hum of machines and the steady work of professionals, she felt something she had not felt all day: hope, and a renewed sense of purpose that would guide her in the days, months, and years to come. Back at the hospital, the atmosphere was tense. Whispers moved quickly from one department to another. Staff who had ignored or dismissed her earlier now found themselves caught in confusion and curiosity. They had heard rumors, small bits of information, about a Navy operation connected to a patient from their hospital. Few knew the details, but the news traveled fast. Administrators and doctors who had been critical of the rookie nurse suddenly felt a pang of uncertainty. They began reviewing reports from earlier in the day, trying to piece together what had happened. The senior doctor who had dismissed her concern found himself rereading the patient's chart. The subtle changes he had overlooked were now glaringly obvious. Meanwhile, the nurse herself was being escorted to the hospital by Navy officers. They wanted her input during the debriefing and to ensure continuity of care for the patient. As she walked through the familiar corridors, she noticed the looks of surprise and recognition on faces she had seen earlier. Some avoided eye contact. Others gave tentative nods. A few whispered quietly among themselves. She focused on the task at hand, tuning out the murmurs. Her attention was on the patient, on ensuring the medical decisions were correct, and on working alongside professionals who understood her skill. It was different from the hospital earlier in the day. Here, every action was purposeful, every suggestion respected, every detail valued. Inside the patient's room, the Navy officer she had tried to protect looked up as she entered. His eyes were steady, his breathing calm. He recognized her immediately. There was no mistaking it. He had seen her competence, her courage, her instinct. "You were right," he said quietly, a small smile of relief on his face. "You saw what others missed. Thank you." She felt a mix of emotions: pride, relief, and a hint of sadness. Pride that she had acted correctly. Relief that the patient was stable. Sadness that it had taken such extreme circumstances for her abilities to be acknowledged. "I only did what I thought was best for you," she replied softly. The officers began debriefing her, asking for details about what she had noticed and how she had responded. She described the subtle changes in vital signs, the irregularities that others had overlooked, and the steps she had taken to ensure monitoring. They listened intently, taking notes, asking follow-up questions. Her input was not questioned. It was relied upon. The hospital administration was summoned to the room. They arrived cautiously, unsure how to proceed. The room was filled with Navy personnel, and the patient's condition was clearly stabilized thanks to her actions. The senior doctor who had dismissed her earlier approached hesitantly. His voice was low. I did not realize. You were right. I see that now." She met his gaze calmly. She did not gloat. She did not need to. The patient's stable condition spoke louder than words. Hospital administrators took careful notes, their expressions a mixture of guilt and awe. They realized that the nurse they had fired was the very person who had ensured the safety of a patient under critical circumstances. It was a humbling moment. The Navy officer, now fully aware of the circumstances, insisted on speaking with hospital leadership. "She saved my life," he said firmly. "She acted with precision and skill. That kind of expertise should be recognized, not punished." The administrators exchanged glances, realizing that their initial judgment had been flawed. Their decision to fire her had been based on appearances, on hierarchy, on assumptions. They had not considered the depth of experience she brought, nor her ability to act decisively under pressure. The debriefing continued. She explained her observations, the steps she had taken, and the reasoning behind each recommendation. The Navy personnel nodded, taking her input seriously. The hospital staff listened in silence, absorbing every detail. By the end of the meeting, it was clear to everyone present that her actions had made a difference. The patient's life had been preserved because she had trusted her instincts and spoken up, despite being new and dismissed. The administrators approached her privately afterward. "We owe you an apology," one said. "We misjudged you. We did not see your experience or your skill. That was wrong." She nodded, accepting the apology without anger. "I only want to make sure patients are safe. That is my priority." Her humility impressed the staff further. It was clear that she had acted out of care, not ego. Her focus was always on the patient. Word spread quickly throughout the hospital. Nurses who had doubted her earlier now sought her guidance. Doctors who had been skeptical listened carefully when she spoke. The culture of the hospital, at least in small pockets, began to shift. Respect was being earned through action, observation, and skill rather than seniority alone. The Navy officer spent a few more minutes with her, thanking her again. He explained that her quick thinking had not only stabilized him, but also prevented potential complications. "You acted when it mattered most," he said. "That is courage and skill combined." She felt a warmth in her chest, a mixture of validation and gratitude. She had been doubted, dismissed, and even humiliated just hours ago. Now, she was being recognized by the very people whose lives depended on her skills. The debriefing ended, and she was escorted back to the locker room. She took a moment to reflect on everything. The hospital that had rejected her was now a place where she could demonstrate her value openly. The respect she had earned today was not just from the Navy, but from her peers and supervisors as well. She changed back into her civilian clothes, feeling the rain-dampened scrub stick to her skin. It had been a long, emotional day, and her body felt exhausted, but her spirit was renewed. Before leaving, she spoke briefly with a few nurses she had worked with. They thanked her for her guidance and insight, acknowledging that her observations had been correct. It was a small, quiet moment, but it meant a great deal. Mutual respect had been restored, and relationships were beginning to rebuild. Walking out of the hospital once more, she felt a sense of accomplishment. The journey from dismissal to recognition had been swift and intense, but had proven something important. Competence and care could not be ignored forever. The rain had stopped completely by the time she reached the street outside. The city lights reflected in wet pavement, but now the scene felt different. It was not heavy or punishing. It was bright, full of potential. She took a deep breath, feeling the cool air in her lungs. She had faced doubt, humiliation, and rejection, yet she had acted with integrity and skill. Her actions had saved a life and changed the perspective of those around her. The rookie nurse who walked home in defeat hours ago was now recognized, respected, and validated. She understood that true professionalism and courage were measured not by years in a hospital, but by actions taken in moments that mattered. Her thoughts returned briefly to the Navy officer. She hoped he would continue to recover fully, knowing that her efforts had made a real difference. And she realized that this day had given her something even more valuable than recognition. It had reaffirmed her purpose. She smiled faintly, a sense of calm settling over her. Despite the chaos, the rain, the dismissal, and the fear, she had held on to her instincts, trusted her training, and acted with courage. And now, she was ready for whatever came next. Days passed after the dramatic events of that rainy afternoon, and the rookie nurse returned to her normal life. But nothing felt normal anymore. The events she had experienced had changed her, reshaped her understanding of herself and the world she worked in. She had walked through humiliation, through fear, and had come out recognized for the very skills that others had doubted. At the hospital, whispers and glances had turned into conversations and small acknowledgments. Nurses who had ignored her or been skeptical of her presence began seeking her guidance. Doctors who had dismissed her opinions in the past approached her more respectfully. It was not immediate, and it was not perfect, but a subtle shift in the culture had started. People were beginning to see her not just as a new nurse, but as someone capable, observant, and committed. She continued to check in with the patients she had saved, coordinating through calls and visits. The Navy officer's recovery was steady, and each day brought relief. She felt a quiet pride knowing that her attention to detail and quick thinking had contributed directly to the positive outcome. It reinforced something she already knew. Being attentive, listening carefully, and trusting instincts could save lives. One morning, the hospital called her into a meeting. She expected a routine discussion, or perhaps a formal acknowledgement. Instead, she was met with something entirely unexpected. The hospital administration, along with the senior staff who had previously doubted her, waited. The tone in the room was serious, yet respectful. The chief administrator began speaking. We want to recognize your actions. What happened that day was extraordinary. You acted with integrity, skill, and courage. We were wrong to dismiss you. Your knowledge and instinct were crucial, and we apologize for not seeing that sooner." She listened carefully, appreciating the sincerity in their voices. She had expected nothing, yet she received acknowledgement not just for her actions, but for her professionalism and dedication. The words were meaningful, but more important was a recognition that her presence mattered, and that speaking up had real consequences. The conversation continued. They asked her for feedback on how to improve hospital procedures and how to foster a culture where nurses and staff could voice concerns safely. She shared her thoughts, carefully but openly. She emphasized the importance of listening, valuing expertise, and focusing on patient safety over hierarchy. They listened, taking notes, and promised to implement changes where possible. In the weeks that followed, she noticed a subtle, yet important difference in how the hospital operated. Junior nurses felt more confident, willing to speak up when they noticed something unusual. Senior staff were more attentive, asking questions rather than dismissing concerns. Even small changes, checking on patients more frequently, discussing cases collaboratively, and fostering mutual respect, began to create a safer environment. Her actions had started a ripple effect, encouraging everyone to take patient care seriously and to recognize the value of every team member. Outside the hospital, her life was slowly returning to routine. She walked through the city streets with a renewed sense of purpose. She still remembered the rain, the fear, the helicopters, and the chaos of that day. But she also remembered the calm confidence that had guided her actions, the gratitude of the patient, and the respect she had finally received. These memories reminded her that even in the darkest moments, clarity, courage, and compassion could guide the way. She began receiving messages from former colleagues, military contacts, and even strangers who had heard about the story. They expressed gratitude, admiration, and curiosity. Some sought advice on how to handle difficult situations. Others simply wanted to understand how she had maintained composure under pressure. She responded with humility, emphasizing the importance of focus, care, and continuous learning. Her Navy experience, once considered irrelevant by the hospital staff, became a source of respect and credibility. She was invited to speak at training sessions, sharing her experiences and insights with both civilian and military medical teams. She taught lessons on observation, quick decision-making, and teamwork under pressure. Young nurses looked up to her not just for her knowledge, but for her resilience and humility. Months later, she was offered a unique opportunity to lead a joint civilian-military trauma training program. The role would allow her to bridge the gap between hospital medicine and field emergency response, sharing her skills with the next generation of nurses and medics. It was a chance to turn her experiences into lessons for others, to ensure that no patient would suffer because a voice went unheard. She accepted the role, understanding the responsibility and the impact she could have. The position demanded dedication, travel, and long hours, but also offered fulfillment and purpose. She thought about the rookie nurse who had walked home in the rain, feeling defeated and unseen. That nurse had grown into a professional recognized for skill, judgment, and courage. She had transformed doubt into opportunity. Her days were now filled with training sessions, simulations, and collaborative exercises. She guided new medical professionals, encouraging them to speak up, trust their instincts, and prioritize patient care above all else. She emphasized empathy, attention to detail, and calm decision-making. Each session reinforced a lesson she had learned firsthand. Courage, humility, and dedication could change lives. Despite her success, she remained grounded. She remembered the fear, the loneliness, and the embarrassment of being dismissed. Those memories kept her focused and compassionate. She understood that recognition was not the goal. Patient care, safety, and trust were. And in every action, she sought to uphold those values. The hospital where she had been fired became a place of collaboration rather than conflict. Nurses, doctors, and administrators learned from her example. Respect became mutual, not dictated by seniority alone. Her story was told in small meetings, training sessions, and even casual conversations. It served as a reminder that listening, observing, and valuing every voice mattered. And she never forgot the patient she had saved. The officer remained in contact, expressing gratitude and sharing his recovery progress. They spoke quietly of the events that had unfolded, of the importance of timely action, and of the difference one person could make. These conversations reinforced her belief in the value of courage, observation, and advocacy. As the months turned into a year, she reflected on the journey. She had been a rookie, fired, and humiliated. She had walked home in the rain, unsure of her future. But her skills, her instincts, and her courage had been recognized, leading her to new opportunities, respect, and fulfillment. The story that began with doubt and dismissal ended with purpose and impact. In quiet moments, she often thought about the day it all changed. The rain, the helicopters, the patient, the validation. It was a day she would never forget. It reminded her that true professionalism, courage, and dedication could overcome doubt, hierarchy, and misjudgment. She smiled often now, not out of vanity, but out of satisfaction. She had walked a difficult path, and it had led her to a place where she could truly make a difference. The rookie nurse who had been fired was no more. In her place stood a professional, confident, and respected, guiding others, saving lives, and proving that courage and skill could never go unnoticed for long. The future held challenges, certainly, but she faced them with calm, confidence, and the knowledge that she had already weathered the storm and emerged stronger. She had turned a moment of rejection into a lifelong mission, and she knew that every life she touched from that point forward would carry a piece of that lesson. Listen, observe, act with courage, and trust in your own abilities.